And then another thing that I've also learned is that inevitably you will go through these very dark periods, these sort of troughs where it just feels like nothing is moving, nothing's going in the right direction. And in our experience, you're always just a couple of weeks away from a piece of good news. And actually, you've just got to sort of hang in there, and that good news will come to you.
Welcome to Entrepreneurial Minds Decoded. I'm Flori Nang, and I explore the stories behind the game changers. I have with me today Tessa Clarke, co-founder and CEO of Olio. Hi, Tessa. Nice to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me on the show.
I've been a huge fan of Olio for years now. Tell us about Olio.
So, Olio is an app that exists to tackle the enormous problem of waste in our homes and local communities. And we do that by connecting people with their neighbours so they can give away rather than throw away their spare food and household items. So, how it works is really simple. Perhaps you are going away for the weekend, you've got some spare food, or perhaps you're decluttering that toiletries drawer or the kids' playroom. You just snap a photo of your spare items, add them to the Olio app. People living nearby get an alert. They can browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. And a typical item of food is requested in less than 30 minutes of being added to the app, and typical household items are requested within 4 to 8 hours.
There's definitely demand for it, isn't there?
There is, yes. And it's one of those things that in the early days, people were always really curious slash skeptical as to whether anyone would really want X, Y, or Z. And actually, what we've found is that there's no shortage of demand. Our largest challenge has actually been building the supply on the marketplace, which thankfully there is plenty of surplus, but the real challenge is actually getting it onto the app.
Olio addresses complex issues such as sustainability, behavioral change, and systems change. And
Mhm.
at the outset, Olio was a peer to peer exchange marketplace. You have said, and I'm quoting, that you and your co founder Sasha's master vision of Olio is to completely reinvent how people consume, to pioneer the total reinvention of consumption and eventually maybe capitalism. Was that your vision of Olio from the beginning? Did you think of it as a behavior transformation tool, circular economy startup, logistics network, or had you thought about constructing a systems change framework?
No. So the honest answer is that when we first founded Olio, it was created to address a very specific problem, which was the problem of food waste in our homes. So people might or might not know that globally, a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, worth over $1 trillion. And in a country such as the UK, over half of all food waste takes place in the home. So households are throwing away £17 billion sterling worth of perfectly good food every year that could have been eaten. So we saw a massive marketplace inefficiency, and we thought that a mobile app could solve that inefficiency. And we were really looking at it from sort of an environmental and economic perspective. And what we very quickly discovered was that what people loved most about Olio actually was the social aspect of the app, connecting with people in real life and sharing. And what we've learned the hard way is that although you can create a solution that works brilliantly well, and the app does work incredibly well, the real challenge is the behavior change piece. And for us, the behavior change element, as we've already touched on, is not on the demand side of the marketplace, it's on the supply side. How do we encourage people to recognize that someone else will want what they no longer want themselves? How do we encourage someone to take the 10 seconds or so to add a listing to the app? And then in our later years, how do we encourage businesses to redistribute their surplus food rather than send it down to waste streams?
At what point did you realize that nudging individual behavior wasn't enough and that you had to focus more on changing the systems around food waste? Because now you have Tesco and you have Sainsbury's and you have
Hmm.
Pret and lots of
Yeah.
large companies in your network.
Yeah. So pretty quickly, we learned that it was not at all cost effective to sign up households, household by household by household, to share their surplus food. So, whilst households are responsible for 60% of all surplus food, and retail stores are only responsible for 2% of surplus food in the UK, for us, it was actually far more cost effective to sign up stores and to get them redistributing their surplus food via the app because that brought actually a large volume of high quality, highly desirable supply onto our marketplace very quickly. That then kick-started the flywheel of neighbor to neighbor sharing, because the surplus from the businesses was coming onto the app thanks to our volunteers who were redistributing that surplus food from their homes. And that then introduced people to the Olio ecosystem. Often, when they picked up some free food from an Olio volunteer, they would then go and reciprocate and add their own listings. And the evolution into connecting with businesses was really a very pragmatic one, because in the early days, our earliest adopters hated food waste, therefore, they didn't generate any food waste, therefore, they had nothing to put on the app. And the local cafes, bakeries, delis that we had hoped would use the app to put up their unsold croissants or sandwiches at the end of the day didn't do so, because they were too busy running their day-to-day business to be messing around on an app messaging with local members of the community. So we were a food sharing app with no food, which I'm sure you'll agree is pretty useless. And so we solved that problem by saying, well, why don't we take these people who have plenty of spare time but no surplus food and match them with the businesses that have lots of surplus food and no spare time. And that has resulted in what is today our Food Waste Heroes program. We have over 100,000 food safety trained volunteers who last year collectively undertook over 1 million volunteer collections. And so that was on 1 million occasions, someone left their home, went to a local business, picked up all of the unsold food, took it home, added it to Olio, and then gave it away to their neighbours and their local community.
That's really impressive. And I do want to talk about those food waste heroes. But first, back to the businesses that you've onboarded onto your
Yep.
platform. And I'm going to use Tesco as an example
Mhm.
because it's such a household name.
Yes.
Did you approach Tesco or did they approach you? How did you pitch to them?
I remember very vividly approaching someone from Tesco many, many, many years ago at a conference, I think up in Coventry. And I can remember excitedly telling them all about this incredibly efficient solution to the problem of food waste. And at that time, I think we had about 10,000 people had joined the Olio community. And I can remember that person was very polite and civil, but it was clear that they saw what we were doing as a little project and that we should sort of revisit with them once we were more sufficiently scaled. It took us over 3.5 years to actually sign up Tesco as a client, so 3.5 years worth of conversations. And I should say that we started off originally on our B2B journey with a handful of corner stores in North London. Then we built up to Planet Organic, which I think at the time had about 7 stores. Then we built up to Pret a Manger, where we were redistributing from 100 stores. And then eventually we managed to get Tesco, who have almost 3,000 stores. So it was definitely a long process, and we needed to have that track record working with others. And that was really helpful to demonstrate to someone like Tesco that the system actually sort of works. Then, of course, we had to go through all of their very rigorous assessment of our health and safety program and all of our systems and processes that underpin our day-to-day work.
How easy or difficult was it to onboard your first corporate, which I was it Compass Group that you first
No,
onboarded?
well, the first large name brand was Pret a Manger. So back in the day, yeah.
How difficult or easy was it to convince them?
I'd say that with most businesses, it has been challenging, because certainly in the early days, what we were doing had never been done before. And so there was a high degree of quite natural, quite healthy skepticism. And even with an organization, if perhaps you have found an individual who is passionate about what you're doing and understands it, you've still got to take the rest of the organization on a journey. So I would say that sort of enterprise sales can be incredibly rewarding when you do actually close those deals, but the sales cycles can be very, very long. So for us, they can be anywhere between 3 or even up to 6 or 8 years. So that's been an enormous amount of investment that we have made, which has meant that we've had to sort of work around that. And so we also sell into sectors that are able to move much more quickly. So, for example, we redistribute surplus food from corporate canteens, and there the sales cycle might be 3 to 6 weeks instead of 3 to 6 years. We also redistribute surplus food from schools, from hospitals, and from TV and film production shoots.
You have 100,000 food waste heroes. Get a message that there's food to be picked up from, say, Tesco or Sainsbury's. They go
Mhm.
pick up the food, photograph it, put it on the app.
Mhm.
They're all volunteers.
Yeah.
Building team and being able to attract talent is super important to the success of a startup. And you have gone beyond that. How have you managed to captivate people and generate this enthusiasm with your storytelling?
I would say the most important thing is having a very clear mission. And it's a mission that it's not just us who care about it. Large numbers of people agree with us that food should be eaten, not thrown away. So I'd say that's the sort of non negotiable. The second thing we've done is we've been really explicit in terms of asking people to help us. And that's often an overlooked step. And then thirdly, we've really co created with our community what them supporting us looks like. So in addition to the Food Waste Heroes program, we've also got another program called our Ambassadors program. We have about 50,000 brand ambassadors who are spreading the word about Olio in their local communities via digital channels and also posters, letters, flyers, etc. And then in that sort of acquiring the community, that actually is not the hardest part of the job. The hardest part of the job is maintaining and retaining the community. And what we have found is that when you have a group of people who care so much about your mission, so much about what you're doing, that and their volunteering for you has become part of their own personal identity, they hold your standards to, your performance to a very, very high bar. And so our community is extremely demanding of us in terms of how they want things to work, which can be difficult when you're a startup that's scaling pretty rapidly, having such a sort of demanding community. But we engage very proactively with our community, and we almost, to give an indication of this, for example, we have, I think, about 300 FAQs on our app. So um, we are very transparent with our community about how things work, but why we've taken the decisions we've taken, how that impacts them. Now, of course, the vast majority of people don't go anywhere near the FAQs, but there's a really small subset of the community who read every single word of those and they then disseminate out all of that core information to everyone else. We also run quarterly webinars where we're extremely transparent with our community about the finances of the company, where we've got operational challenges, how we're thinking about things, upcoming projects. And again, that's really important for engaging those, the most of the biggest advocates amongst our community who then go on to spread the word to the others.
When you have a community that is so engaged with the mission and they're true believers, how do you balance scaling the business against impact and not deleting impact, or what your ambassadors and members would perceive as deleting impact?
So, at its core, our impact and our scale really grow in lockstep with one another because the more food we can rescue, therefore, the more businesses we're working with, the more revenues we're generating, and the more impact we are having. But where it does become slightly more challenging would be, for example, we a couple of years ago decided that we need to introduce advertising into the Olio app because to be a sustainable business, you also have to have an impact business. You also have to have a sustainable business model. And one of the ways in which we generate revenue, so roughly 90% of our revenues come from charging businesses for the service we provide, but the other 10% comes from our community. And we have a freemium business model whereby you can upgrade to become an Olio supporter, where you unlock additional features in the app. And one of the challenges we had was that no one bothered to upgrade. And that was because the free version of the Olio app was just so good. And there wasn't any additional feature we could offer in that upgrade bundle that would persuade people to convert. So we had to extremely reluctantly take the decision to put advertising into the app, which then the app being advertising free became a core feature of the upgrade version, and it helped us generate incremental revenues, which was absolutely crucial from the advertising itself as well. And that was an example of something where some members of the community who were very purists were really angry at us, but I would say actually the vast majority recognized that it was a very pragmatic decision. We were very transparent about why we had made that decision and why our finances required that we make that decision. Um, so yeah, but beyond that, we don't on a daily basis have big existential clashes between scaling and impact because impact really is embedded in the core of the business model. It's not an add-on.
How hard was it to acquire users? How do you create that trust between strangers, especially when it's about giving food away and when it's not from a business like Tesco, it's from someone's
Mm.
house?
So acquiring users is something we've always done pretty well. At the moment, we will have anywhere between 50 and 70,000 people joining Olio every month. Over half of them are joining us through word of mouth, and the other half are joining us primarily through organic marketing channels. And the reason for this is because our community are incredibly passionate about Olio. They love what we're doing and they tell friends and family about it and they post about it on social media very organically. We've also lent into that. So we are always asking people to spread the word, encouraging them to spread the word. We make it easy for them to do that. So our biggest challenge has not been acquiring users and it's not been retaining users, it's been conversion. So encouraging people to take that leap of faith and add a listing for the first time. Once people have done it and they realize really very quickly that one or more people would love their surplus item and they experience the joy of giving something away, giving something sort of a second life and having a really positive impact on a member of their local community, then people stick with it. But it's just that conversion piece, which is the biggest hurdle for us. And that's where we've had to leverage as many learnings as we can from the world of behavioral psychology to encourage people to take that first step.
And what do you do to convert?
Oh, I mean, there is no single silver bullet. There's honestly just hundreds of micro nudges layered on top of one another, whether it be sort of social proof in terms of sharing with people how many other Olioers are signed up near them, through to making the UX as streamlined as possible and embedding AI so it's really fast and easy to add a listing through sharing their impact data with them, to give them that kind of feel good factor for what they've done. So, uh, yeah, hundreds and hundreds of things collectively help drive conversion.
Olio is now in over 60 countries. How easy is it to replicate this food waste heroes model, taking into account cultural differences?
So, Olio has been used successfully to share items in over 60 countries, as you say, and that has happened very organically. Our largest communities are in Singapore, for example, where we have 200,000 people using Olio. We've got hundreds of thousands of people in Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Argentina, and pockets of people in lots of other countries around the world. In terms of the Food Waste Heroes program model, that we are only now in the early stages of exporting that to other markets because once again that is a multi-year sales cycle which involves us having conversations with the leading grocery retailers in the markets and agreeing with them that we will roll out. So that's still very much a work in progress. What we have found is that it is not so much the cultural differences that are impacting us from country to country, because actually sort of a dislike of waste and a desire to connect in a way that is safe, easy, and convenient with your local community is desirable pretty much everywhere. But the biggest differences is the regulatory environment. So, for example, there are some markets where it is illegal for a volunteer to volunteer for a business.
What's something you thought would be hard to get users to do, but turned out to be very easy and vice versa, apart from the conversion that you talked about earlier?
Well, I was about to say, we thought it might be hard to get people to pick up stuff, like to go get food from a stranger's house. And when most people hear about Olio, that's the first question they have. Like, would anyone really do that? And that has been remarkably easy. I think, in particular during a cost of living crisis, then providing people with a stigma-free way to access free food from their local community is actually a really powerful product proposition. And the hardest thing to do, honestly, is getting people to add listings to the app.
Tessa, you have defied the statistics on investment in female founders, on investing in impact startups. We'll talk later about how much you've raised, which is a
Mhm.
phenomenal amount. At what stage was it easiest to raise capital or difficult? To talk us through the whole process from your pre-seed right through to Series B.
I'd say it's never been easy to raise capital. As a female co-founded tech for good pre-revenue and then early revenue business, we didn't exactly have investors banging our door down. So every raise has been a challenge. We have, though, raised 5 times. We've raised just over $50 million. And I think what has enabled us to be successful is the fact that we are tackling an enormous global problem, and we have a very elegant solution. And we've got a really strong founding team and management team, and we've got great traction. But having said that, Olio is definitely a type of investment that only really appeals to what I refer to as conviction-based investors. And these tend to be people who are very well established, very seasoned investors. They're very confident in their own judgment and intuition. Because we're very non-normative, we're very unusual, it's certainly been difficult for managers who are early in their career, or perhaps funds that are first fund. Olio is definitely not an easy business to write a check into, just because we are so unusual.
You've made it look very easy, but I know
There
it's
can
not
be a big
easy.
difference between the outside and the inside, I can assure you.
Absolutely. Your investors clearly see Olio as a valuable business. How do your investors view Olio? Is it a logistics network? Is it about the data? You have 8 million users and you're going to acquire many more going forwards. Is it about the number of users, which could pivot the business into something different, more diversified? What sort of business is it to your investors?
We are a marketplace business to our investors, so almost all of our investors have deep expertise in marketplace investments, and they recognize that there is an enormous marketplace inefficiency. So in this case, the problem of food waste specifically, but also waste in our homes and local communities more broadly. And all of our investors are similar in that they share our vision, they share ambition, and also they have truly patient capital. So they recognize that once we can build this business to scale, there'll be no shortage of opportunities that come off the back of having a really engaged user base like that. But the reality is, it does take time. We are sort of making the market as we go along. But as we move into an increasingly geopolitically uncertain world, a rapidly heating world, we are already seeing quite a significant mindset shift towards resources such as food, whereas to date, our food system has had food waste totally embedded into it. It's been completely endemic, and there's been very little efforts to solve it. But as countries start to realize that food security equals national security, without a shadow of a doubt, we will not continue to be in the situation where we're in right now, where a third of all the food we produce each year globally gets thrown away.
Did you ever imagine that Olio could become so successful from an impact perspective and also raise so much money?
I don't consider raising money as a benchmark of success. In terms of impact, whilst I'm incredibly proud of our impact, so to date we've had 140 million meals worth of food redistributed via the platform. We've had 16 million household items, and that has had an environmental impact equivalent to taking over 1 billion car miles off the road, and has also saved 44 billion litres of water from going to waste. Those impact data points I always knew were possible, and I'm very proud of them, but I'm very frustrated because, to be honest, they are less than 1% of our full potential. So myself and Sasha are still at full steam ahead, agitating for much faster growth, precisely because of the incredible impact that we are able to have through this very efficient and asset light and scalable solution to one of the largest problems facing humanity today.
Yes, of course. The amount of money you raise isn't the success. It's the fact that you've raised that money, which can be put to the problem.
Yeah.
That is the success. Food and household waste is $1 trillion problem. Do you think food waste is ultimately solvable by changing behavior, or do you think we need regulation to really move the needle?
Without a shadow of a doubt, we need meaningful regulation in the food waste space because whilst the majority of food waste in Western countries takes place in the home, most people assume that most food waste takes place in businesses. And as long as people can see businesses throwing away food at the scale that they are, they feel under very little pressure to scrutinize their own behavior. And businesses, because they are still wasting food, do not yet feel comfortable trying to educate the consumer about how to prevent their food waste in the home. So we are stuck in a little bit of a catch 22 situation. And businesses are not currently under any meaningful pressure to solve the food waste problem because it takes place behind closed doors and there's very little regulation, or in fact, no regulation here in the UK mandating that businesses need to solve their food waste problem. And that is problematic because as long as food waste is taking place behind closed doors with no real pressure on these businesses, and whilst the cost of sending food waste off to waste streams remains incredibly low, there's very little incentive for businesses to take meaningful action on this problem. So we are very clear that our number one regulatory ask would be for mandatory food waste reporting to be brought into effect so that the food waste problem is brought out from behind closed doors into the public arena where businesses can be properly scrutinized on what they're doing. So we really do believe that sunlight is the best form of disinfectant. There are a number of other regulations that are sort of much more detail oriented that we would love to see in this space as well, but I won't bore your listeners with that level of detail.
Do you mean mandatory food waste reporting just for large corporates or small businesses as well?
For medium and large corporates.
What is the role of startups in climate related problems, and how can governments engage more effectively with Olio and other startups on this?
So, two questions there. In terms of the role of startups in climate, I think that startups have a crucial role to play because they invariably have the solutions to the problems that we face. They're extremely innovative and resourceful, but they have a real challenge in that they are not easily able to access capital and they're not easily able to access routes to market, which is why I really believe that if we want to change the climate scale at pace, we need to see lots of cooperation and partnerships between startups and corporates because the corporates do have the capital, they do have the scale, they do have the routes to market. And in terms of what government specifically can be doing, I would be encouraging all governments to, in the first instance, actually just look at their own procurement because the government has a large opportunity to become a partner with many of these climate startups just through their own purchasing power. So that's a great starting point. And then, of course, whichever sector you look at, there are regulatory changes that could be made that could dramatically accelerate the adoption of climate solutions.
When you talk about purchasing power of governments in relation to startups, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, the government runs the NHS, it runs our education system, it runs our defense system. And whenever they are buying services, they have the opportunity to make sure that they are proactively and actively looking to work with startups as part of that procurement process rather than just defaulting to the current existing suppliers who perhaps aren't focused on solving the climate aspect of the problem.
People define success in different ways. For someone who's as mission driven as you, what does success for Olio look like?
Right now, we have a handful of million people using the Olio app each year, and we would like hundreds of millions, if not more. So we've got a very, very long way to go.
Are we moving towards a sharing economy fast enough for climate timelines?
No, in a nutshell, it is inevitable that we are going to have to move towards a circular economy. The current linear extractive economy, which has as its sort of core fundamental the concept of infinite growth on a finite planet, by very definition is going to run out of road and already is. We've exceeded six of the planet's nine boundaries. We are living through climate breakdown, biodiversity crisis, resource depletion crisis. So we are going to have to transition away from the current version of capitalism to a much more circular economy. And we can't do that quickly enough.
You grew up on a farm in Yorkshire. What
Yeah.
was that like?
It was wonderful in that I loved being outdoors in nature. We were sort of pretty feral kids, but it was very, very hard work. It's a small family business. Farming is a brutal business. So we lived with the threat of bankruptcy and going out of business looming over our heads every single year through my childhood. It's incredibly stressful because you can't control the weather, all the animals, all the machinery. You can't control the price of your inputs or the price at which you sell your outputs. So it really is a very, very difficult business. But I think it equipped me with lots of skills that have now set me up for my entrepreneurial career. So lots of resilience, lots of grit, lots of hard work, and also lots of creativity and problem solving. So when you're on a farm, things are always going wrong. You don't have the perfect solutions to hand. So you've got to think very creatively and laterally to solve the problem in front of you with what you've got in front of you.
I grew up in Singapore and
Mm.
then Brisbane, moved to London. I've always lived in big cities. Now I live in Norway and I lived next door to a farm for a while. And it hadn't occurred to me that it was so difficult to grow food.
Yeah.
You went to Cambridge and then to Stanford for an MBA and you had a corporate career. Do you think your corporate background helped or hindered you as an entrepreneur?
I think it helped because my co-founder, Sasha, who also had a corporate career, together we were very aligned on the things that we found useful and helpful from our corporate experience. And we were equally aligned on just ditching the stuff that was not at all helpful. So examples of things that we kept are, weekly one-on-one meetings with your direct reports, sort of biannual 360 feedback processes, employee satisfaction surveys. There were lots of things, just a small example of things that we learned from our corporate career. But then things that we abandoned from the corporate approach was just the very, very sort of slow, risk averse approach to everything. And there's the timelines as well. So, I can remember my corporate career. Most projects would be sort of, 6 to 12 months, maybe up to 24 months. Whereas sort of, a long project in a startup lifetime is a 6-week project. So it's just a very different mentality and mindset.
What does a normal day look like for you now?
Gosh, there isn't such a thing as a normal day, but I guess there is a sort of rhythm to the day, which involves me getting up and sort of sorting out the kids and breakfast and school run. Then I will always do some form of exercise, ideally outside, which I found to be absolutely fantastic for my physical health, my mental health. That's when I also have all my highest quality thinking and real sort of breakthroughs in terms of problem solving. And then I will be at my desk generally from sort of 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. and we'll have all sorts of meetings. And then generally on a Wednesday and Thursday, I go to London for events and I will often be sort of speaking at events on a Tuesday and a Wednesday evening, really kind of spreading the word about Olio, networking, building relationships, etc.
How do you reset when you feel mentally overloaded?
Sasha and I have learned that entrepreneurship, they say it's not a marathon. Sorry, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we would take it one step further and say it's a series of marathons. And so what that means is you do actually have to take really good care of yourself. Of course, you go through very intense periods, perhaps when you're fundraising, for example, or launching a new product. but it's really important to make sure that you carve out that time for yourself during the day or during the week. And if you have had a really stressful period, just taking it down a beat and trying to decompress, because burnout is just not a productive way forward for anyone.
Absolutely. Do you find it easy to switch off work?
I've got better at it because we've been doing it for 11 years now. But I would say, even when I'm not working, I'm often thinking about work and
Mm.
absorbing information and data from what I see, conversations I have with people. And I'm constantly sort of retrofitting that or taking inspiration from that for Olio.
So you get your best ideas as you're out and
Yes,
about.
definitely. Yeah, my best ideas are definitely when I'm not at my desk.
You run a remote first business, meaning that you don't have an office. You meet as a team twice a year. And this remote business model was in place even before COVID. How do you foster collaboration and cohesion within the team when you don't see each other all the time in person?
So, very easily is the honest answer to that. But the ingredients to make that work are a couple of things. The first is having a really strong mission, like we do. And we recruit everyone who joins Olio not just for mission alignment, but for mission obsession. The second thing is we have very clear company values. There are just four of them. They are inclusive, resourceful, caring, and ambitious. And again, we recruit everybody to those company values. We measure the performance of each individual against those values. We measure our performance as a company against those values. We take decisions on the basis of those values. And then we work really, really hard around communication and documentation. And our company culture is extremely strong. And I know that because of our regular employee satisfaction surveys, where we are generally scoring kind of 8.5 plus across most metrics. So we have a highly motivated, highly engaged, really high performing team. And that is perfectly possible when we don't have an office. But you do need to make sure that you recruit people who thrive in that remote first environment.
And how many employees do you have?
We're just over 40 people right now. We were over 100 at our height. Um, yeah, and back down to 40 today.
Was there a reason for it? Did you find that you could streamline more work now with AI productivity tools, or was there another reason?
Um, we downsized in response to the macroeconomic downturn that took place in sort of 2022, 2023. And as it became clear that the old days of growth at all costs were gone, and there was a real focus on unit economics and profitability. And I have to say that we are much happier being that kind of leaner, higher performing team than we were before. And we have, for the past couple of years, really very heavily leaned into AI and have focused on unlocking the productivity benefits that we can get from that. And we've had a real step change recently. So our productivity per developer head has doubled from Q4 of last year to Q1 of this year, for example. So we're very, very bullish on harnessing AI to help our small team rapidly accelerate our impact and the growth of the business.
I've seen that same story replicated in many startups. Teams did downsize, and now with the inclusion of AI tools, they have become more efficient and
Yeah.
productive as well. Who are the people you lean on most when things get difficult, apart from your co founder? Do you rely on family, friends, other founders?
Honestly, I'd say it really is mainly my co-founder, Sasha. I don't talk much about the business to family and friends. And I do find having lots of conversations with peers extremely helpful. So if I've got a specific problem or challenge, or we're thinking about going with this new system, it's very, very helpful having a strong peer network. So that's great. And then over the past 2 years, I have also been undertaking peer group coaching, and that's been a really productive model.
What is peer group coaching?
So there's a small group of between sort of 6 and 8 founders who are running organizations that are perhaps at a sort of similar stage, and you'll meet once a month and you'll follow a model which was really pioneered by YPO, and you will someone will bring a business challenge to that monthly meeting, and then everyone else will have an experience share around that. So it's a really, really effective way to get inside the experience of other founders and to benefit from their experience when they've perhaps had challenges that you are facing.
I think that's so true. I was in Thailand last year over the summer, and one of the founders there was saying to me that they have produced so many unicorns, which is incredible for a very small country because it is a very small country. So everyone kind of
Mhm.
knows each other and then they talk to each other. So the know how is passed
So they
down. And
share the
yeah,
learnings.
they
Yeah.
share the learnings. And that's really vital, I think, to any ecosystem to make sure that it thrives.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to early stage founders?
Gosh, lots of advice. I couple of that immediately spring to mind is one, I would suggest that you fight any innate perfectionism that you might have and just make sure you get your product out there as early as possible because you can't beat real world feedback. And then secondly, you've got to get through that sort of test, measure, learn cycle as rapidly as possible. And just the more reps you do of that, the more you increase your probability of success. The other piece of advice I would give is to not hang your hopes on there being a silver bullet. I know that certainly for the early years, both Sasha and I lived in hope that there'd be a silver bullet in terms of a new hire or a new marketing campaign or a new product release or a new fundraising round, that would sort of unlock the hockey stick growth. And actually, in our experience, and I think the experience of the vast majority of startups, is just about layering on lots of those lead bullets. And so, emotionally, if you can just let go of the hope of a silver bullet and just get down to the hard work of layering on the lead bullets, then I think you'll be much more emotionally resilient on the journey.
It's quite incremental, isn't it? It's almost like you have to show up.
Yeah, you have to show up sort of day in, day out. You just got to do the reps. And then another thing that I've also learned is that inevitably you will go through these very dark periods, these sort of troughs where it just feels like nothing is moving, nothing's going in the right direction. And in our experience, you're always just a couple of weeks away from a piece of good news. And actually, you just got to sort of hang in there and that good news will come to you. Now, of course, you shouldn't just continue doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Clearly, nothing's going to change if you do that. But actually, if you're testing, experimenting, learning, being humble and ambitious in equal measure, then good stuff will happen.
How do you keep yourself positive?
I think I am by nature a glass half full type of person. I think perhaps to be an entrepreneur, you have to be that type of person. So it's not something I have to work on. That's just I think I would just get too miserable if I allowed myself to get down about everything.
Tessa, thank you so much for your time. This was a fantastic conversation and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.